So much sun stuff. Ready?
It's 5:30, perfect. I will go ahead and call to order the September 19th, 2024 meeting of the Salem Historic Landmarks Commission. Would the recorder please take roll call?
Commissioner Kerwin,
Here.
Commissioner Amen,
Here.
Commissioner Tippett.
Here.
Commissioner Morris. Here. Commissioner Strauss,
Here.
Commissioner Strong. Absent, Commissioner Weathers. I am here. And Commissioner Zimmerman. Here. And Commissioner Kaiser is absent, excused. We have quorum.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have anyone here to give public comment on something that is not on the agenda? There's a couple people here. I guess I'll just double check the. All right, there is nobody signed up. Which brings us next to the approval of minutes. Could I please have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes as written. Second.
Perfect, we have a motion by Commissioner Tippett and a second by Commissioner Inman. Are there any corrections that you'd like to make? All right, perfect, and all in favor of approving the motion to approve the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes pass. And for the record, Commissioner Strong has arrived. Alrighty, we don't have anything on the agenda for public hearings or action items, so that brings us down to discussion items. And it looks like we have a presentation from the Heritage Disaster Resilient Program.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. Give me just a moment to put up my presentation here. Alrighty, my name is. Thank you so much for the technical assistance. Thank you again for having me here this evening to give a presentation on the Community Disaster Resilience Planning for Heritage Resources project. My name is Melissa Graciosa. I'm a faculty member from the University of Oregon within the Institute for Policy Research and Engagement. And I've been working with a team of planning graduate students along with City of Salem Historic Preservation staff and representatives from heritage organizations within Salem as a project committee to work on this project over the past year. So my agenda today is just to give a little bit of context of this project for folks who haven't been involved. I see a few familiar faces for folks who have joined us as part of our project committee, and then really focus my time on sharing some of our findings from our planning process and some of our draft recommendations, and leaving a little bit of time for questions and answers hopefully at the end. So a little bit of background of what we've set out to do. This project is a partnership with Oregon Heritage, our state historic preservation office. And about 5 years ago, we conducted a pilot project with the city of Cottage Grove to do this disaster resilience project in 2019. So it was a pretty exciting year to be thinking about disaster resilience and heritage resources. And so we completed that pilot project and created a state planning guidebook to guide other communities who are interested in this kind of disaster resilience work. Because that was so successful, Oregon Heritage and the University of Oregon partnered to apply and was successful in receiving a FEMA Hazard Mitigation Program grant, which has enabled our work with the city of Salem, along with 5 other All-Star Heritage communities in Oregon. So we've kicked off our project as of last year with the city of Salem and city of Bend, and we're working with 4 more communities with similar projects in their towns. So the purpose of doing this project really is that heritage resources are certainly important and valuable to people for a lot of different reasons, but certainly thinking about these as sources of community identity, local economic drivers and sometimes overlapping with important community infrastructure. And these resources aren't typically included in disaster resilience planning or just general disaster resilience or disaster planning when we're thinking about preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. And so we really see this project as an opportunity to highlight those roles for heritage and cultural organizations, as well as programs at cities for how they can have a role in emergency management and disaster resilience. When these things aren't described or quantified, they're not often then directed resources for projects for preparation, response, and recovery. So including those and addressing those gaps. So as I said, we've been working on this project with our city partners over the past year, starting with background research and compiling available data. We've been working with our project committee, facilitating an organizational questionnaire, conducting interviews with the committee and community members, doing a community outreach event at the Salem Farmers Market, a community survey to get more input from broader community members, some hazard mapping, and then culminating in a disaster resilience workshop where we pulled together our project committee, city facilities staff, and city emergency management staff to think about what those resilience strategies and actions should be. So this summer, we've been really focused on compiling and reviewing that plan so that we can support finalizing it and then adopting it in a way that makes sense for the city of Salem, whether that's part of the historic preservation plan or organization strategic plans. And then we'll kind of pass the baton to Oregon Heritage to support technical assistance and implementation, pulling together folks about a year from now for an implementation workshop. So that'll include folks from all the different cities that we're working with to share lessons learned, strategies, and support that kind of energy around implementation of the recommendations that we put forth. And then we'll try to celebrate a little bit of our hard work. So I'm going to dive in next to what we've found so far working with the city of Salem. And I've structured it in a way that it kind of follows the structure of our written plan. So I'll kind of pose the questions we are hoping to answer, how we went about answering them, and just a sampling of some of the things that we have found for sake of time today. So I'm happy to follow up with more detail if anyone would like some more. So first, we wanted to create a foundation of the policy and planning framework here in the city of Salem. So we are asking how current Salem plans discuss heritage resources and disaster resilience, where there are opportunities to align those plans and cover gaps, and how local ordinances or codes discuss heritage resources and disaster resilience. So our background research had us looking at federal and state requirements, looking at a handful of different Salem plans, including the historic preservation plan, amongst many others, and then looking at the historic preservation code and other parts of the development code where it was relevant. And really what we found is that the goals and strategies of the historic preservation plan really closely align with disaster resilience. It's not explicitly called out, but essentially the pursuit of those goals and strategies will increase the resilience to unexpected events or disasters. And not too much of our surprise, we saw fairly limited connection between heritage resources and other kind of disaster resilience planning and other city documents. With the exception of the cultural landscape management plan for Bush Park Pasture and Deepwood Gardens, which really clearly discusses the potential impacts of natural hazards and lays out a decision-making framework for addressing those and some potential strategies for that. We also note that Salem is really unique in their archaeological program and the protection of archaeological sites, detailed in your local ordinances, guidance on the city website, and throughout Salem's development code, and certainly supported by the staff capacity of relationship building over time, monthly coordination with partners, and government to government agreements of understanding. The next part of our planning process had us looking at creating a profile for heritage resources and organizations here in Salem. So we asked what types of organizations are there, how many, and what do they do? What type of resources are there, how many, and where are they? And then what kinds of designations, programs, or processes surround local resources? So we pulled some maps and available data, we engaged with our project committee, and included some of these types of questions when we engage with the broader community. What we found and want to recognize is that Salem has a long-standing commitment to historic preservation, which is really reflected in the depth and breadth of your program and partners. So here's just a short list of what we know that you all do and recognize it as pretty special. So pretty robust in your program here. We identified more than 15 organizations in Salem dedicated to historic preservation and heritage-related programming. And these organizations, they include nonprofits and state agencies that really span a lot of different kinds of missions around heritage related programming, whether it's museums or collections or performing arts or hosting local businesses. So a really diverse collection of organizations related to historic preservation in Salem. And then we drew on the state historic sites database to kind of start to look at the types of resources that are here. And this database records over 1,800 resources here in Salem. It's important to note that the database is not a designation, although it does track on resources that are part of the National Register, but does not necessarily reflect local designation. And a lot of the input to this database includes properties that have been surveyed by Oregon Heritage or have been submitted from certified local governments or other agencies doing related work like ODOT, but also include properties that have maybe been submitted by involved community members. So of those resources that are recording, it does give us status on eligible, significant, not eligible, out of period, demolished, and all those types of things. And the bulk of this database is really buildings, and most of those buildings are residential. So again, important to note that this database is fairly available and is likely to be a resource for emergency responders when they're thinking about damage assessments. So it can be a valuable resource to provide to folks either at the state or federal level post-disaster, really thinking about what's been impacted and damaged. Salem also has 500 sites for the National Register, and I think there's 2 more that are eligible and not yet. There are many other things that aren't included on that database, including archaeological sites, a designated Oregon Heritage Tradition, the Oregon State Fair, which I think was just happening. It's my very first job. The collections and archives from all the organizations that steward things here in Salem, heritage trees, public art, public spaces, and parks. Next, our team turned to look at vulnerability and risk. So we asked how heritage resources are vulnerable to natural or human-caused disasters, and what other types of vulnerabilities impact heritage resources, and how would that change the impact of the disaster event. Again, really looking at background research and plan review to identify those hazards, starting with the Salem Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan to really guide our work and engagement with folks. With our project committee and our community through surveys. So this table just represents the table from the 2023 Salem Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan and the risks that they have evaluated for different natural hazards here in Salem broadly. What we learned as we engaged with our community members and through community and background research is that the hazards that certainly impact heritage resources include extreme heat, air quality, winter storms, earthquake, flood, fire, and disease. Certainly wanted to reflect some of our learning from experiencing COVID-19, and human-caused hazards like theft, vandalism, and inappropriate use, which is a broader category to include actions of using a place that is not intended to be used as, whether that's storing materials, occupying space, informal camping. So really thinking about hazards as external events. And we identified some other vulnerabilities for heritage resources, including business closures, vacancy, maintenance, natural decay, uncatalogued, unknown, or not designated resources, and the current emergency preparedness protocols and policies. So these vulnerabilities being more of the internal variables that can affect the sensitivity or exposure to a hazard event. For sake of time, I'm just gonna give sort of a quick overview instead of breaking it down by hazard. But generally, what we found across many different types of hazards here in Salem is that we see impacts to events and facility rentals, often affecting things like mission critical activities, revenue generation, or impact to grant reporting, health or safety risks to folks, lack of access to buildings, to prevent or mitigate stress damage in a timely manner, damage or loss of resources, damage to buildings or utilities, and the potential for erosion or moved earth having potential impact to archaeological sites. Next, we engaged the community a little bit in these questions of heritage resources and disaster resilience, and we wanted to know what community members were aware of and how they engaged with organizations or resources currently, and how they discuss value or importance of those resources, and how the community might perceive the risk of those resources to disasters. So again, including background research, project committee meetings, a survey, interviews, site visits, and outreach events. Most of what I share is going to reflect community survey results, so it is important to note that it's not a representative survey, but really just the presence or absence of opinions within folks who took the time to take the survey. So we had about 160 verified responses to that. Most often, survey respondents engaged with historic gardens and parks, commercial historic buildings or districts, and public murals, and reported lower levels of engagement with historic cemeteries, interpretive signs, and records or archives. About 82% of our survey respondents reported that historic preservation was very important or important for maintaining the community identity of Salem. And that most frequently, survey respondents are reporting the value of heritage resources around their educational and cultural value. We asked a couple of questions towards the end of our survey around that perception and risk. Nearly 79% of respondents were not sure or not aware of how these resources have been impacted by disasters, whether damaged or lost. But for those that were aware of previous losses, they certainly thought that it impacted the community, naming things like financial impact, impact to a shared sense of history, the loss of natural resources, traditions, natural beauty, or the loss of important documents being some of those specific impacts. Next, I'll show you a couple of draft recommendations. Our next steps are to work with our project committee to finalize these. So you're getting a little bit of a preview of what we're suggesting kind of moving forward. First, we recommend aligning planning efforts and covering gaps in city plans related to the protection of heritage and cultural resources and disaster resilience. So there's a few specific places in the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan and the Salem Emergency Management Plan, which update on frequent cycles to include inventories of heritage resources, any specific needs related to mitigation activities, and then specific protocol or operations around response and recovery for heritage resources or historic resources, particularly thinking about debris removal, site cleanup, because sometimes the actions of recovery can be quite hard on resources themselves. And then to make explicit connections between heritage resources and disaster resilience and future updates of other city plans where it's relevant. So we looked at a downtown strategic plan and we looked at parks plan for some opportunities there. We recommend supporting organizational preparedness actions. So all of our organizations are kind of at different points in this emergency management preparedness planning, whether it's creating an emergency phone tree, to being ready for technical assistance from the Salem Emergency Manager, or creating a business continuity plan. We also recommend addressing these various levels of organizational preparedness through reconvening the Salem Cultural and Heritage Forum around disaster resilience, potentially participating in an annual preparedness month of activities and sharing resources or lessons learned quarterly. So September is designated as the preparedness month here in Oregon. So it's an opportunity to partner with other kinds of activities that may already be happening. Potentially hosting public events to increase awareness or give folks the tool to address their resources on a household level. And also a time where folks can convene and leverage their capacity for refreshing emergency training, evacuation protocols, no need to have 15 separate trainings when folks can come together for one where it's relevant. We also recommend protecting and broadening access to Salem's historic resources, so coordinating the catalog of archives, collections, and records not currently digitized, and looking for ways to increase funds and capacity to inventory those, share on appropriate platforms, provide training for accuracy and consistency, and resourcing equipment that is compatible to support that work. We recommend increasing access to funding for historic building renovations, so it certainly aligns with the historic preservation plan, and connecting folks to existing resources, as well as identifying other types of funding resources from the lens of disaster resilience. And then finally, continuing to support and build partnerships, expand opportunities for folks to get involved and connect the public to existing resources, whether that's a training for owners of historic properties, leveraging the existing neighborhood program, partnering with arts and cultural organizations, connecting with schools, or just broadly working towards marketing and outreach to connect folks with what already exists here. That's the end of my presentation. I'm more than happy to take questions. I know that was quite a bit of information, probably very quickly, so I'm happy to expand on anything or follow up with someone if you'd like.
Questions from the commissioners? I've got some questions. Could you tell me a little bit about, so there's a lot of the resources in Salem are privately owned, and it seems like a lot of the policies that you might be proposing would be like, city code, that kind of thing. How do you see this preparedness translating to privately owned historic resources?
Thank you for that question. We do recognize that many of those buildings included on the state database are privately owned historic homes. And so really what we're suggesting is more technical assistance and connection to existing resources, so that folks are aware and know what their options are, particularly for funding, which can be a barrier. So really wanting to orient our plan to the partners who are involved, who can kind of catalyze that energy as well. So some of the things that are more city oriented is just to help give some direction to our city staff on what's kind of within their purview, or organizations who might be project champions.
Excellent, thank you. And could you tell me a little bit about how you selected the committee members?
Yes, of course. So we kicked off this project beginning of last fall, working with our City of Salem Historic Preservation staff as our kind of core partners in project management. And so we really relied on them to help us identify representatives from different heritage organizations. So a few folks from our Historic Landmarks Commission, and then other just active folks who are willing to dedicate time for those meetings from different nonprofits here. So folks from Bush House Museum, Deepwood Museum and Gardens, the Elsinore, and a couple other that are on our list that I'd be happy to.
Awesome, yeah, I was just kind of curious about that. And one last question, I'm kind of curious, so you said that the first city was it Woodburn, not Woodburn?
We worked with the City of Cottage Grove in
Cottage
2019.
How did the implementation of the planning process go in Cottage Grove? Were there lessons that you learned from that process?
Absolutely. I think what we really saw is that implementation really relies on our project champions. So we had some very active city staff that were willing to maintain energy around it and find ways to implement it. Perhaps already just aligning it with work that they had planned to do, but now having a new lens of disaster resilience to that. We know that they moved forward and inventorying aspects of their downtown and identifying, having a list of folks who are downtown business owners to coordinate those on Main Street, and hired a consultant to do a fuller inventory of that, which included businesses, buildings, his neon signs and other things that are kind of tricky to categorize or don't fit neatly on other types of databases or lists.
Excellent, thank you. So as far as next steps for the Historic Landmarks Commission, is there a point at which we could review and provide comment, or is there some way for us to help you with the rest of the process?
Yes, absolutely. So my immediate next steps are to present our draft plan to our project committee, but I'd be more than happy to provide a draft to you all for comment. Happy to take some directions or thoughts, particularly thinking about the work that aligns, that you all do on the day to day. So I would expect that in the next 4 to 6 weeks, let's say.
Excellent. Oh, yeah, Commissioner Kerman.
So have you had the chance to work very much with local tribes?
We have relied on Kimberly to connect us with folks who are involved in the monthly tribal roundtable. And so I was able to give a presentation broadly of the project that we were setting out to do. I think back in January or February, just to have an invitation and share what we were doing. And then recently we were able to visit with Chris Bailey at the Confederate Tribes of Green Pond and learn more about their cultural resource protection. So I will present to the tribal roundtable again next month and offer our report with further comments.
Thank you. Then follow-up question. On one of your slides, you talk about how the city of Salem has worked really hard to build relationships and have the monthly roundtables with partners. I would recommend putting the monthly roundtable meetings with partners and tribes.
Okay.
Just to call that out in your slides. It's something that the city of Salem has focused quite a bit on, and the government to government MOUs are mostly with tribes. But just kind of making sure that tribes are called out in there a little bit will help anyone who maybe has that, is looking for that in your slides to see that you are working with the city that works with tribes. And so that's kind of like, that's kind of why I asked the first question, if you are doing it directly or if you're going through the city of Salem. And I'm glad to hear that you're going through the city of Salem, because definitely Kimberly and a lot of folks here and other realms have worked really hard to get those MOUs and then continued coordination and consultation with the tribes. So I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Zimmerman.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation tonight. And Melissa, I'm curious, you mentioned there were like 5 cities. I'm curious who the other 4 are, and are you getting the same kind of response from the community, kind of same level as you are from the city of Salem? And is there anything that, I guess this is kind of the second part of the question, is there anything that's kind of surprised you in this process as you've done this work?
Great question. So far in my experience, they have all been very different. Each program at the city level is a little bit different, and certainly folks who are within the network and really involved. I think working with the city of Salem, I'm incredibly impressed and learned so much about urban archaeology, and that was not on our radar in the same way, working with the city of Cottage Grove, just given where their program is at this time. We've been concurrently working with the city of Bend, and their program is also very different. Their community and the amount of development has shaped their community in a really specific way, and our committee is made up of largely city staff, so that has sort of shifted and changed the outcome of that. The other cities that we're working with, we're going to kick off things with Albany and Astoria, and then we have 2 others which we're still to confirm. But I'm going to anticipate that they're each going to be very, very different, particularly as we go to the coast and kind of think about different hazards. And we really wanted to allow it to be different, just give them folks to try to meet them, but also support them if there was some interest in kind of expanding who they were working with or the types of businesses. But so far, extremely different.
Thank you.
Commissioner Strong.
Where can we get more resources on what you've been talking about, specifically emergency disaster response for historic building owners?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a ton of resources on Oregon Heritage's page, and I'm happy to connect you all with that. It includes the guidebook that we developed with Oregon Heritage, all of the organizational and city plans that we did with the city of Cottage Grove, and their continued work around messaging, We're also really excited to share that our work with Oregon Heritage and our work in Cottage Grove and with you all was featured in a Main Street America Disaster Resilience Toolkit, which just published earlier this month. And so we'd be happy to report that as well.
Yeah, Commissioner Inman.
My question is there any way to prepare in advance with FEMA and the federal government for financial resources for qualified historical resources? And my reason for asking that is, you know, in the event of a disaster such as an earthquake, I mean, there are buildings that are going to be damaged, really badly damaged or broken, and in order to prevent, you know, sudden demolitions, you know, have pre-planned for financial resources so that we can prevent that kind of thing.
Yes, I think there's some opportunity in working with Salem Emergency Management staff on the next update of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. This is a plan that updates every 5 years and is needed in order to kind of unlock FEMA funds in the case of response and recovery to disaster. So there may be some opportunities there where there might be some specific funding or mitigation projects that would be useful, and then having it within the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan can make it more eligible for other kind of granting programs.
My other question has to do with whether or not our identified historic resources are flagged so that when building inspectors go out after a disaster, they will know that they're looking at an historic resource.
That's a great question. And I might need to kind of rely on city staff a little bit, but what we drew on was the state database. That does not necessarily align with what is locally designated. And so having sort of an official list of what's locally designated, what's on the National Register, and what other buildings or resources have historical value, having sort of an agreed upon list would be really useful. In the event of a disaster, folks would be using that kind of data to assess damage or destruction. The way that a building inspector would maybe rely on like taxation assessment data as they're looking at buildings generally.
They're going to go to a public list, and you know, that's provided by the city or the county or the local government. And in my experience, a lot of those inspectors are not local. They will, there's going to be mutual aid from other cities or even states, and there will be inspectors and utility workers and people coming from other places when there's a big national, you know, FEMA type disaster.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Cartman.
So your group and all the committees, you're in really unique situations where you get to gather all this information from all these cities. Do you have any plans to have a way that these cities can share that information, or maybe you share that information with other cities? So like, for example, I am super geeking out in my head on how Astoria is gonna go, and like me personally, I would love to see what they've done and how they've handled it. Also because a lot of times plans for heritage resources or historical resources can align with cultural and archaeological resources more than people think. And I'm sure on your committees, it's rare that you're able to get archaeologists to be on the committee to be able to bridge that gap. And so that's just one aspect, and obviously a bias aspect on the perks of these cities being able to share that information with each other. Are you situated in a way that you can be that medium to share that information? Or is it going to, I assume there's going to be confidentiality issues, but yeah, do you have the capacity in your program to do that sort of thing?
What we have planned at this moment, and trying as much as possible to be as flexible to where needs arise or interests arise. we have a final kind of implementation workshop where we pull folks from all the communities that we've worked with. Starting, from what our first projects was Salem and Bend, then Albany and Astoria, and the 2 other communities. We'll pull them back together in about a year from now. They're gonna be at different places in that planning process, but that'll be an opportunity for them to share lessons learned, as well as pulling back folks from Cottage Grove to kind of check in on how things are going with them and what they might share with other folks in other communities of what they've learned there. And then we hope to reflect all of our learning, so there may be a time where we have some more focused conversations with folks from our committees or our direct partners, so that we can reflect all that updated information in the state planning guidebook.
Love it.
Excellent. Any other questions? Are there any comments from the folks who have been on the committee from the commissioners about being on the committee or the process that you've seen so far?
It was just entertaining, not entertaining, but like very interesting being on there and just learning where some of the resources are at, if they even are, have any preparedness to it. Also, just some of the ideas that came out of what is considered a hazard. And Juliana had she's had her own personal experience, so she had a lot to share in the evening, so.
Excellent. Great. Well, I think if we don't have any other questions, we're looking forward to the next thing we hear on this. Maybe next year, September 2025, we could coordinate, since it's the preparedness month. We can do something with the HLC as well. So looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
All righty, perfect. That brings us to our next discussion item, which is the work plan assignment updates. Is there anything from DAC on that?
I just have a few things to pull up so we can show everyone who's on which. As soon as Zach saves the day, we'll get that.
Technical next.
That's sweet.
And so I think these should be correct as of today, so if we want, we can just go through the subcommittees
Oh,
and
perfect.
take notes.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. We can go ahead and start with the education committee then. Do you have any updates, Charles, Connie, and Chris? Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Strong.
Just a quick update. Yes, Jacob and Kimberly and I met briefly, and the current plan is that we are going to try to organize a historic window interactive workshop. And starting with that, begin to build a group somehow of people who own historic properties in Salem in some way that we can begin to connect people so that we have sort of a central discussion board or something where people can go and find the resources that are already available, but just kind of hard to find when you're on your own and not familiar with it. Kimberly suggested reaching out to everyone who owns a historic property in Salem, since she does have that database to contact people, and also putting in a newsletter, starting that way, and then and then having one workshop to start with to begin to engage people and see what level of interaction people want, what resources the public is looking for. I mean, we have a long list of suggestions, but we do need to get some more feedback on what the interest level is and where people are looking for resources and information. How the city can respond.
Perfect. That sounds great. I would love a window workshop. One of the pulley ropes on my old window just broke, and so now I have to figure out how to fix it. So that'd be great for me. I'd love to go to that workshop.
I think it's, sorry,
When one breaks, you go ahead and do them all.
Yeah, right.
There's one out there.
yes, Chris Gustafson, who is a window preservation expert. He restored my windows, he restored windows up at Silver Falls State Park, and he mostly does commercial properties now, but anyway, I've spoken with him a couple of times, and he he is willing to do it, and I think that we can fund it in a way that makes it work for everybody.
Perfect. Great. Well, let us know if you need support from other commissioners on organizing. I think, you know, if we've got an event that you need help for outreach or whatever, we can assign some extra help. So perfect. I love it. Any other updates from the education committee? Yeah, Commissioner Morris.
So this is a little more nuanced in an educational perspective, but we are continuing to work with Qingming group. They are now going for grant funding for a new, just a new table as opposed to doing the full excavation and restoration of their existing tables. So we're in the process to provide some additional drawings and narrative that will help them get grant funding for that. When I say we, I say that's my firm working with Kimberly and Jake. And then we're also working with Gilbert House. They're doing some work that's going to be part of the public outreach and some public sector improvements outside of that. So hopefully that gets approved by Parks. And then still working with Bush House Museum and SAA for their continued reinvention of their house and how that's perceived historically.
Excellent. Sounds like there's lots of stuff going on in the education committee. I love it. Great, perfect. We can go ahead and go on to social media, which is Commissioner Zimmerman, you're our sole social media.
Yeah, things are still going pretty well. Kimberly and I have continued to provide the Salem history moments for KMUZ. That's been pretty successful, as well as writing little historical pieces for Salem Porter, and she and I kind of switch off on doing that, as well as Instagram and Facebook posts. So we've been doing pretty well with those, and it's kind of weird sometimes to see the things that get the most interest from folks. You think some things would be the ones that would grab folks, but then clearly aren't. It clearly isn't those. So it's just kind of interesting what people are kind of looking for, what kind of hits at the right moment.
What have you been seeing people responding to?
Well, like some of the like actual like historical event type things that I put out there, sometimes people are kind of quiet about, and sometimes it's just like a random photo or something generates some interest or something. So I like to restore everything to get on the kitchen sink out there just to kind of see, just so we kind of have a variety of content. But if folks have anything that they want to see, then let me know. I'll be happy to put more things out there, either in terms of events or other kind of historical stuff that we maybe I missed or something.
Perfect. Sounds like maybe we've got some coordination opportunities coming up with maybe our window workshop. So
Certainly.
that would be great. Perfect. Culture and Heritage Forum, Commissioner Inman and McGlinty Timber.
I think you just had an update.
Yeah, we did. We had a big update on the disaster relief. Okay, perfect. Great. The next thing is the Scan Heritage Neighborhood. It sounds like maybe we've got some volunteers online. I haven't heard too much, Jake, but I'm excited to, get going whatever is ready to go.
But we're in a little bit of a race with upcoming weather to get good images, and so we're moving pretty quickly on getting that team up and all the tech ready. We just today kind of settled on a kickoff meeting, to get everyone to be able to use the technology so they can, enter the images and that sort of thing. I'll send a email out if commissioners want to attend that. And we can move from there. Right now, that's all we're looking at is getting them on the ground pretty quickly.
Perfect. Yeah, keep me updated. If I'm available, I'm excited to do some surveys. So yeah, happy to do that. Okay, great. Archaeology.
So I found out the hard way that the application process that you need to go through to apply for a proclamation from the governor has drastically changed than how it's been the past 10 years. So before you could fill out, your application was just an email with pretty much the proclamation written out, and then they just have to put their header and a signature and then boom, done. Now, probably because it's more professional, now it's a form and it's a whole process. You have to also justify yourself as a professional and being the one to apply for this proclamation. Which kind of was like, okay, I don't know which hat, I don't know where to do this, and so I had myself, I had to like check legally where I could say I'm from and everything. So that took a little longer, and then it's a 45 to 60 day review process. And what I tried to ask if that was business days or days, and they said, well, it just depends, and I was like, that makes a big timeline. So I have turned in my application for the proclamation for October to be Oregon Archaeology Month for 2025. This year did not quite work out. But I'm still working with Kimberly. We are in the process of trying to grab as much of the representing Oregon archaeology that currently is housed at ODOT's archaeology lab and trying to move those into the city's lab that will be a bit bigger and hopefully actually get some public view. Right now, we have like posters of the Oregon Archaeology Month. We used to always do posters, and budget and constraints kind of killed that a few years ago. But we have those posters all framed, and they used to be in the ODOT's hallway as you walked in. Well, ODOT has a sliver of a building now and we're moving. So all of those posters have just been sitting in a stack in our archaeology lab. And so once I excavate to the corner of the lab, I can retrieve those, right? I can retrieve those posters. And so I'm excited for that because these posters are awesome and they represent the history of what Oregon professional archaeologists saw to highlight in those years. Because they go back, I think we have 20 or 25 of them. And so, which isn't that long, especially in archaeology years. But 25 years ago, archaeology was extremely different. And so seeing those early posters as like, look how far we've come. And then we look at the poster, it's like, oh, wow, we still have a lot to work on. But anyways, they're great. I'm excited to work with Kimberly on moving those forward. And then working on whatever summer excavation that we're going to be working. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Question would there be any interest from the state archives in housing that? I mean, do they have space and?
Yeah, so the archives, we thought about the archives, it's hard, it's again, we want to try to put some of these things where the public can view them. Now, I make it sound like the lab is huge, it's a closet, so where we put some computers in there. And so it's not a very big space, we don't have that much stuff, but it's stuff that are kind of neat collections that aren't really represented anywhere else, like the posters. And so while, you know, they'll be at the City of Salem, the Association for Oregon Archaeologists, the AOA organization for Oregon, has been trying to find someone to take these posters to put them out for the public to see in different facilities all around the state. And they've been trying to do that. Let's see, hold kid. Yeah, I think we like threw it on the agenda like 10 years ago. And it's just been a struggle every year. So the fact that Kimberly's like, oh, you have posters? I mean, I just about ran out the door and grabbed them right then and there. So yeah, the archives is going to receive some of our paper copies of things that are more confidential. We'll digitize them, but because we don't have the space anymore to house them, we'll take them to the archives. Pretty similar to what SHPO does with their permits.
Excellent, perfect. Thank you for the update. Our last work plan group is the historic designation group, which is me and Juliana. We've had some pretty significant progress on the Criterion Schoolhouse, which is nice. We're kind of in the review process with the folks at the schoolhouse. Hopefully we'll get that kind of figured out pretty soon, and then we might see that on the agenda by the end of the year, maybe, we'll see. So we're getting pretty close. I haven't heard too much on the Englewood. We met about that property, the park, a few months ago now, so just kind of coordinating with volunteers and with Jake and with me on how we're gonna divide that work up. So I think we're doing pretty good. Is there anything else that staff would like to update us on in regards to the work plan?
Not at this time, I think that works for that, and we'll probably some overlap when we do the officer report after the newsletter.
Okay, perfect. Any other updates before we move on? Okay, great. I think newsletter is up.
It's me. We didn't have a meeting last month, so no one signed up to do any articles yet, but the previous month we did briefly discuss the theme as being spooky. Unfortunately, the person who voiced the most interest is not here today, so I can't bully them into signing up for an article, but if anyone else would like to sign up for an article, the theme is spooky. So if you have any suspected haunted buildings or potentially maybe that, I forget the story, it's a murder, but an extrajudicial murder outside of the Hoops Redford. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't know, that would be an appropriate article.
Spooky.
Yeah. So that's the theme for next, this is to go in the next month, so it is a very quick turnaround. And then one other thing, not to put Commissioner Morris on the spot, but the photo, I forget what we're calling the series, but like, what is this photo?
Yes.
History.
History, yes. If you have an idea for that, I would appreciate that. But are there any commissioners that want to volunteer to write a short little thing? Commissioner Kerwin?
I'd like to volunteer someone else, but I'll, because of it being the season and archaeology month is typically October, I'll try to put something in there. If it's spooky, I can talk about the budget. I mean, that's pretty spooky right now. And then for the history mysteries thing, I don't know what all of photos you were thinking, but like some of the, you can always turn to archaeological historical items. There are so many things we find at sites and say, what is this? And
Very good.
you think about like a wagon, for example, and kind of imagine it like exploding with all the parts, and then it's like that part, and at sites we're like, what does this represent? Oh, it's a whole wagon, but this is what we got. So I don't know, just as an example, if you're looking for photos, I've got lots of examples of historic debris that I really had to scratch my head on, so.
Yeah, that's great.
I could write something about the missionary cemeteries and the Iowa cemetery.
I have a newsletter centric question. Where does one find and or obtain the newsletter?
Oh, it gets sent out via email, and I maybe have not added the newest commissioners to that email list.
I just have so many members of the public that are just clamoring to get a copy. I won't be able to provide it to them. I went to cityofsalem.net/historic, which is a thing, a thingy, the notes or whatever. But it says page not for.
Oh. I will update this, I'll definitely agenda.
The newsletters are online, is that right?
They are online, they are just not linked to the historic landmarks page.
Oh, okay.
There was an issue, part of this is just workload, replacement, but when we switched to the new newsletter, we were not able to link to it from our old website. Then we updated our website and now we are able to link to it. And I just have not had the capacity to go back and do that.
Okay, great.
So it is something that's just always on the bottom of my to-do list.
Sure. Maybe a nice holiday project.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
never busy at the holiday. Thanks. Okay, cool. Great. Do you want maybe one more?
Potentially, I saw Juliana was maybe gonna say something.
I don't know if it's too gory, but the racist murder and fire in the house that's in the Port Chemeketa district. And the house was a kind of a flop house, and there was a big court case, and the house was eventually purchased by people who lived in the neighborhood and restored and then sold. Anyway, I can look up the history on this one, because it was, I mean, it looks beautiful now. A picture of it is like, would you believe that this, but it was a really dramatic episode. It's not a ghost.
That meets my criteria.
It was creepy.
I think that satisfies my needs for the newsletter. I'd like to get it out before our next meeting. But it can be like minutes before our next meeting.
If you wouldn't mind just sending an email with a reminder of what I committed to, because I forget what I say back in my email and I'll remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm still looking for the news.
I don't think you'll find it. Does anyone else have any newsletter things before, Kim's not here to give this or presentation officer update, so Jake and I are gonna both split that.
Was there any responses on the winning photos, if we didn't get anybody excited about them, or?
I did not personally hear it.
That's fine.
Technically, the newsletter gets sent from Kim's email, so she may have gotten a response and just didn't share it, but she usually shares those things, so.
Okay, cool. Well, always good to hear anything better photo contest happens. Okay, great. That's it on the newsletter then? Perfect. Then I think we can go ahead and move to the historic preservation officer report.
I've got a few small things. Jake and I did not coordinate, so we'll see if I cross off everything or if he's got more things, but to answer a previous question about the process going forward. So after we're done with the Heritage Project with the group, so you'll have the opportunity to provide comments during that. It will come to the Landmarks Commission as a formal item to be adopted to our historic preservation plan in the future, which means that you all will review it at a public hearing, make a formal recommendation to City Council, and then City Council, assuming you do want to recommend that it be added, City Council will vote on whether or not it's added to our historic preservation plan. So that'll be a couple months process, but that'll happen probably early next year sometime.
Are we anticipating any code changes to come along with the plan, or is it gonna be mostly in the historic preservation plan?
I believe that it's just adopting it as an addendum to the historic preservation plan. It is treated similarly to a code amendment in that it's a tech form process, but
Okay.
it wouldn't change the code.
Just curious.
At least I don't anticipate that at this time. You all may direct us to update some code stuff, but I don't anticipate that.
Okay, maybe something to think about while we're reviewing and commenting.
There's a CLG workshop coming up. I sent you all an email about it probably like 2 hours before this meeting. It's gonna be in October in Dallas. If you'd like to go, it is a free workshop for our CLG community. So there's that, and then next month is going to be when we review the historic design review for the applicants who are a part of our missing teachers grant. And so we anticipate next month being a big one. And we just wanted to see if we had any known absences already. I know one, but that's October 17th is the next meeting.
Charles will not be here. But Charles would have to recuse himself. So Charles will do that and also not be here.
Fair enough.
Let's see.
I think that means we still have quorum if everybody else is able to attend, so,
Currently, if I just have the 2 absences, we're good.
okay, great.
And that's all of my things that I prepared. I don't know what Jake has.
Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more question. Is there any note on the agenda for the CLG workshop?
I do not recall, it might be in the email I forwarded to you, but
Yeah, I'd have to take a look at the email. I was just curious if it was like, oh yeah, that sounds like something we're really interested in. You could coordinate somebody going and then reporting, but we can take a look at it and figure it out.
Thank you very much, Zach. One thing that like Zach said, Kimberly's not here today, but I do want to say one quick thing about Zach and all these things we do that we have capacity to do are not just because of Zach's role, which we're fortunate to have, but he actually has an unusual level of commitment to his role. And so that helps us to be able to do more things and more outreach and that sort of thing. So I want to take a second to say that publicly so that we can have that recognized.
Thank you.
The other thing I want to do is with the CLG workshop that's coming up, I think we've got that November 6th. And it's going to be at the Majestic Event Center in Dallas. And so it'll be in the Majestic venue at least. But also, one of the person who is going to be there is the National Park Service tax credit reviewer for Oregon, who's a guy named John Sandor. And I worked with him when I was doing tax credit reviews for the state of Missouri for about a year before he transferred over. And he is, if you look at some of the preservation briefs and things about windows especially, you'll see his name in there in the byline with the other 3 or 4 people. And so he's very knowledgeable and has been there for quite a long time. He's also a good guy to get along with. So I would suggest that if we have time and ability to go, it would probably be worthwhile because he has a lot of knowledge.
Can you say his name again?
John Sandor, Sandor. And I think he's doing several sessions there. And then, yeah, other than,
He's on the email too, his name is, that's excellent.
and then, yeah, just, it's important if you can at all make it next month because we have the grant things, but we also have 1 or 2 additional hearings. So it's going to be a big, hopefully to knock out a lot of the get us through the end of the year. One big meeting. Other than that, I don't really have anything that's that eventful. So I'll just turn it back over to unless you have any questions.
I've got one thing. This is just a very future heads up, but we are anticipating that the city manager is going to be coming to our December meeting to give you all a presentation.
Okay. Great. It sounds like maybe the CLG workshop might be good for the education committee, just as it seems like it's related to resources for historic property owners.
I did already register.
Oh, perfect, excellent. Maybe we could put an agenda item for you to kind of share what you learned if you're able to attend that. Sure, that would be amazing. Perfect. Is there anything else that anybody would like to comment on before we adjourn for the night? I'm not seeing anything, so I think we'll go ahead and adjourn the September 19th, 2024 meeting.